How will you select the sites? Is there a framework or a strategy for selecting where these units will be built? You know, which boroughs, what neighborhoods? Is there any formula or any a strategy that you've developed to make these selections?
I would say a couple of things, Senator. First of all, part of the way that the agency works is we let the market decide what should be built. We have a statewide, as I said, a statewide mandate. We need to make sure strategically that we're allocating our resources statewide in an appropriate way according to principles of parity and fairness and so forth, matching the local need. And there is, as we've talked about, a deep need for affordable housing at all levels, as well as housing for the homeless and people with special needs all across the state. So we keep a very careful eye to make sure that we're allocating our resources in that way. Beneath that, when you're talking about down to the individual block or project level, again, we work closely with our local partners in the development community, for-profit, not-for-profit, local elected officials such as yourselves, to understand where there are available sites and where projects that exist need work. We have regular capital cycles where we make it known to the public that our capital is available, and then we take applications. It's a very, very transparent process, but one in which we work closely with all of our local partners.
And budget-wise, I know that the $20 million will be spread out throughout a period of time. How much are you expecting to allocate, let's say, this year and the following year? The $20 billion that were proposed by Governor Cuomo for the affordable housing, particularly the new affordable housing, the $10 billion for the new affordable housing and the preservation. How are you going to roll that out in terms of time? This year, next year?
Sure. I think on a relatively smooth time scale. I don't think you're going to see much lumpiness once the program really gets going, particularly on the new construction side. I think once we make our first, assuming the budget passes on time, which obviously it will, once we will move quickly to make our first large batches of capital through all of our usual programs available, and then you'll see a smooth rollout over the next 5 years.
Last week, Mayor de Blasio was here, and we spoke about the mandatory inclusionary zoning, and the criticism or the concern that has gotten because of the average medium income levels, and there seems to be, for many years, great concerns as to what really is affordable housing. And so what is the guidelines that you have for average and medium income for the housing, the affordable housing that you're proposing to build?
Senator, we use, and I suspect the city uses pretty much the same measures, well-accepted guidelines that are publicly available to determine what we call low, very low, and extremely low income. So that we think about 85% of our 100,000 units are going to be targeted to low and very low, and extremely low income residents in New York. It's the same. We're talking about the same income bands as a percentage of area median income that I assume Mayor de Blasio and his folks are talking about. That differs obviously from region to region. So area median income where you are is different from where Senator Kruger is, or from where some of them are right, and so forth. But it's the percentages that really matter.
Okay, thank you. What about could you provide us with a breakdown on the spending for the, let's say, for the $439 million of the J.P. Morgan settlement funds for the 2015-16 budget cycle? Last year's
Sure,
settlement
Senator.
money.
Absolutely. And we had the opportunity to talk a little bit before with Assemblyman Wright as well. You're exactly right. About $439 million of J.P. Morgan settlement money was allocated to the state, particularly for housing purposes. Although, as I said, our agency is the principal housing agency for the state. There are other agencies that have that do work in the housing field, and they were allocated or suballocated some of that money. Our agency in particular has a little bit over $200 million. The first $100 million of that is for NYCHA, and we've, I think, spoken about the $100 million, the unprecedented, as Mr. Wright said, $100 million that you and your colleagues made available to NYCHA, of which about $40 million has already been publicly targeted towards security purposes, and the other 58 or 60 million is about to be approved by the Department of Budget and then handed over to the legislature for review. The rest of that money is going through our ordinary capital allocation process. It's actually, I think, been awarded It's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 100 million plus, and which means that once those awards are announced, the money is moving out the door on a schedule that's the same as any other capital that we have.
Would there be any additional capital funding for NYCHA in this budget cycle? Because you have allocated $6.4 million, but last year, capital funds at the tune of $100 million seem to be very helpful, and NYCHA continues to need on an ongoing basis that infusion of capital dollars to keep a very deteriorating housing stock from really collapsing. Are you planning to have any additional capital dollars for NYCHA this cycle?
Not in this cycle's budget, Senator, no.
Okay, the TPU. I know that traditionally we've been having this sort of like fight to ensure that TPU has its own dedicated funding stream and that is his own individual and unit, but it continues to be funded through the Office of Rent Administration. And is there an increase there for TPU, and there's also a concern that the Office of Rent Administration has not gotten the funding that it should have to address the needs of tenants and landlords from across the city that need their services, the backlog, I know they're strapped for staffing. And so now if you connect TPU to that, and it's sort of like fighting for the same funding, I think both will be compromised. Is there any way that we're going to get additional funding for Office of Rent Administration, and what's the funding allocated for TPU this year?
So Senator, as we've talked about both in our meetings and in this hearing, the work that TPU does is a critical piece of the governor's and the state's responsibility to protect tenants from illegal harassment. The work of ORA, the Office of Rent Administration, is equally important. It's ORA, as you know, is staffed by about 250 extraordinarily hardworking civil servants whose responsibility is to oversee the 900,000 rent-stabilized and rent-controlled units in the state, most of them, as you know, in New York City, and I think more than your district than any other. They work incredibly hard. They work side by side. TPU has a somewhat different role. It's the proactive investigative arm. We're happy to keep it funded. We're happy that it continues to be funded, and we're at the same time pleased that the legislature and the governor continues to see fit to fund ORA at levels that we think are adequate to do their good work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Assemblywoman Bouchette.
Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you being here today to testify on housing. I just had a few statements and comments and questions around the affordable housing proposal, as well as the TPU and the 421 tax abatement. As you know, in New York City, affordable housing and the weak rent laws that we have has been very problematic to New Yorkers, especially in my district, Flatbush, Brooklyn, where thousands or even millions of New Yorkers are being pushed out illegally, priced out illegally out of their homes, which obviously impact the rate of the homelessness that we're facing in New York City. Last year many of us got arrested. We were shouting and yelling and really wanting to make everyone know that this is an issue that's dear and near to us, and we have to fix it. So with that said, I hear that the tenant protection unit seem like it's being defunded or not funded as it was last year or previous years. And I'm very happy that it is in place and that it is an investigative piece that help us look at landlords who are illegally destabilizing or decontrolling these units. I personally think that the $5 million that was allocated last year was too little, although there were a number of overturned units that were restabilized, the rate is so much more. And I'm hoping that you reconsider to put in place maybe 10 or 20 or two-digit budget, $1 million budget, to address what's going on in New York City. And that's why we have this issue of supportive housing that we need and affordable housing. But I do want to say that I'm very happy to see that there is a capital allocation for affordable housing throughout the state of New York with a governor's proposal on the New York House 2020. My question is, in the city of New York, there's been an aggressive goal as well of 200,000 units proposed by Mayor de Blasio. I would like to know how is the governor's plan of 50,000 units of affordable housing throughout the state and Mayor de Blasio's 200,000 units in New York City. How are they being integrated? Are they being integrated? Are they working together? Is it part of the same package?
Thank you for your question, Assemblywoman. And it's, although you didn't ask, you're not specifically asking about TPU, I think it's appropriate that you brought TPU. You prefaced your question about the development of more affordable housing with your comment about TPU and about the effects on your constituents of in some cases gentrification or of neighborhoods turning over, because it's an extraordinarily complicated problem to deal with, and in many ways, while TPU is a part of our arsenal to try to combat illegal harassment, which is critical, in the end, really the only solution is to continue to build and preserve new affordable housing. We have to keep the stock that we have safe and high quality, and we have to build more and keep it affordable to all New Yorkers. That really is the #1 goal of the governor's plan. That's why we put out a goal. He put out a goal, an aggressive goal of 100,000 units over the next 5 years, and most importantly, that's why it's fully funded at the levels that we've talked about. As far as your question about working with New York City, I am certainly well aware of the mayor's own aggressive goals towards development and preservation of affordable housing. We, my counterparts at the city, particularly at City HPD and at City HDC, are friends of mine. Our staffs are friends, have worked together productively for years. Although we now have a lot more capital to invest than we have in the past, the fact is our agency has developed thousands and thousands of affordable units throughout the city, alongside of the city agencies with no problem whatsoever. They're close relationships, and nothing about that will change going forward.
Okay, thank you. Also, one more question around the 421 tax abatement. You did mention that whether it continues to be suspended or not, the housing plan will continue. Is there another proposed program that might be in place to incentivize the developers to continue building the affordable housing plan?
Sure, it's a great question. There's nothing that I'm aware of. There's certainly nothing that's been developed by our agency. I know that we were all waiting eagerly to see whether the parties could come to an agreement as last year's legislation asked them to. They were unable to do so. I think really at this point we move forward with the programs and the money that we have. The city has available to it a number of other tax abatement programs that they use expertly, and I suspect that they will simply make more use of those programs if there is no replacement for 421A as it stood before.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to point out that we've been joined by Senator Bill Perkins, and I'm going to take privilege as Finance Chair to ask a few questions myself right now. And there's a lot to talk about, so I might have to go to round 2. But I was very interested and was listening very carefully to what you were saying, Commissioner, about the TPU. And so just to clarify, and I think you've said it, there's a $4.5 million increase for state operations cost in the budget, general. You're saying that that $4.5 million is going to go to fund the TPU.
It's my understanding, Senator, is it's the same. It's funding for the TPU at the same level that it was funded in last year's budget.
So it's interesting you say that because I don't believe that the TPU was lined out in last year's budget. So the question is, how was it funded? Was it funded through reappropriation last year? Because it wasn't something that the legislature approved in the final budget.
Sure. So, Senator, first off, if we could come back, or I could have my staff come back to yours to make sure that we understand fully that everybody's on the same page about that. My understanding is that the overall funding for ORA is the same between this year and last year, the same authorized appropriated funding. Now, whether there are nuances there that our staff should talk about, I defer to them.
Yes, because what I'd like to see is the specific reappropriation and the amount of funding from last year.
Understood.
Because I don't believe that we have that, so that would be very helpful.
Absolutely.
You know, you talk about the differences between the TPU and the ORA, and it sounds like you're funding the TPU through the ORA. One of the things that we asked about last year, and I was wondering if you could give a status update on this, the Office of Rent Administration does very critical work, as you know, because they are out there addressing actual tenant complaints that come in. And unfortunately, there are reports that show that they were at least 18 months behind, even more, in addressing those specific tenant complaints. And so it seems like the TPU is out there kind of in a fishing mission, but at the same time, you have actual incidents where tenants are feeling that they're in harm's way, that they have a complaint that needs to be addressed. And so I'm hoping that you could give us, because I'm sure all of my colleagues would be concerned about tenant complaints being addressed, what the actual status is now, what's the turnaround, how quickly are these issues being addressed?
Thank you for your question, Senator. I know that there have been informal and also formal reports of those kinds of operational questions at ORA. Obviously, the work that the reports, much of that work predates my time here, but you have had a chance a little bit to get to know me. I hit the ground running.
Yes, you have.
And I come to this work from the private sector, and I have a very high expectation that you can make a lot of difference in even very complicated organizations if you review the kinds of processes that they're using and do more with the same amount. It's that kind of approach that we're taking to the work of ORA. The governor has mandated that from the top down and across a number of agencies, and I think he is exactly right. It's what we call the lean process, and it's had tremendous impacts on many of my sister agencies, among them DMV and others. We're reviewing ORA's activity every single day as hard as we can to make sure that we are doing the absolute best to respond quickly to complaints, whether they're from tenants or from landlords. I should say that much of what the ORA does is that they do have, obviously they respond to tenant complaints. You're exactly right. Much of what they do is simply processing of landlord requests for increases in rent. And of course that work is at least equally important because it goes directly often to the financial viability of the buildings that the tenants live in. And ORA works very hard to process those complaints as fast as possible, and that is, again, the kind of work that we're going to be focusing on intently in my tenure.
I appreciate that. If there's any kind of data that you could supply the Senate regarding the turnaround time with the complaint issue through the ORA, that would be really helpful to get that.
I will absolutely
Sounds
do
like
that, Senator.
you're staying on top of it. And also, could you please provide to the Senate the staffing levels in 2015 and 16 for each of the following ORA activities? So again, it's processing of MCIs by the MCI unit. Would be helpful to see that data. And also the processing of rent overcharge orders by the overcharge unit.
I'd be delighted to do that.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Sometime this week.
Also, just switching over, and I thought Senator Little asked some very good questions. I'm glad to hear that for the House New York program and the $20 billion for the $100,000 or 100,000 affordable housing units, that the units are expected to be distributed geographically. You said about half outside New York City, about half inside New York City. So I'm very glad to see that you're focused on a regional balance. One of the things that I was interested to hear you say, and I'd like to probe a little bit further, but you talked about with or without 421A, you believe that we will reach that goal of 100,000 units. And you talked about HBD, I know HCR, we do very good work on affordable housing through financing from the state, and we've gotten a lot done. My question is, however, you know, and I know the governor is very, very concerned about affordable housing all over the state, developing affordable housing in New York City, and obviously without 421A, I think that there's going to be a difficulty in private sector investment in developing affordable housing. When Mayor de Blasio was in last week, we had a long discussion about the oppressive tax structure that we have in New York City, about the fact that the regulatory burden is so heavy, the land costs are so high, there's so many impediments to developing affordable housing, and it's made the crisis even worse as we've gone along. And so I was just wondering about 421A, you know, what are your thoughts about moving forward? Because quite frankly, from a private sector development incentive tool, it's the only tool in the toolbox that is available out there. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Senator, I thank you for the question. I guess I'll refer back to my time in the private sector. New York City is blessed with, and 421A is a New York, as you know, is a New York City only program. So the fact that I'm going to talk about New York City for a moment rather than the rest of the state, I think is, don't hold it against me. You know, it's coming from the private sector, I can tell you that New York City has an extraordinarily deep and sophisticated real estate development community at all levels, affordable housing, for-profit developers, on up to the highest end development. 421A started out not as you know, not as an affordable housing tool, but as a tool back in the early 70s when the city needed, it just needed something to get it back on its feet. And it's developed over time, as you all know, into a tool for development of more, for incentive of more, to provide more affordable housing. I guess my view is I have a short-term view and a long-term view. I think short-term, it's hard to argue that the absence of 421A won't have some impact. I completely agree with you. It's something that was used widely, and now if it doesn't exist, it's not there, and it will take a little bit of time to readjust, for the market to readjust. But over the longer term, and particularly now that the governor has chosen to inject so much new capital into the affordable housing system, I think the market will readjust. Whether there is a new 421A-like thing or not, the market will figure out how to meet the demand for affordable housing in New York City, and we will, of course, be a big part of it, with or without 421A.
Well, what I'm hearing, and I appreciate what you have to say,
Yep.
what I hear is that people are saying that we just won't build. And so I think that's a major problem, and it's a shame for the people of New York City being able to have affordable housing available to them. So I would encourage you to continue to work on a solution along those lines. And I will cede my time because I have other questions about supportive housing, about the Community Investment Fund, about NYCHA, and so you'll be hearing from me again, but I'll turn it back to the Assembly right now.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Assemblyman Mosley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for coming in today. Before I go to my two questions, I just want to kind of scale back. When you talked about the guidelines for affordability being similar to what the city's guidelines are, the city obviously is stating that they cannot build unless they have a similar 421A tax abatement program, if not the old tax abatement program. And you said that you can meet those same demands with or without 421A. And then you talked about the market kind of will meet the demands. Can you extrapolate on that just a little bit?
Sure. You know, again, you know, a world without 421A is a little bit new to all of us, so it's awfully hard to predict how it's going to play out. But the fact is, the governor with this budget is injecting over $2 billion, really over $2 billion of new capital into the development of affordable and preservation of new affordable housing than was there last year this time. It's over for the next 5 years. That, on top of new capital that the mayor has made available to the market through his own affordable housing plan, gives me a great deal of confidence that all of these aggressive goals can be met.
And when you say the market, do you mean the private sector market, or do you mean the private sector along with the public sector market?
Together. operating in tandem. I mean, that's really, the only way affordable housing gets developed, particularly in a market like New York City, is close partnership between private and nonprofit.
And under your interpretation, do you believe that 421A needs to be completely eradicated or simply modified?
As in many things, I'm agnostic. I think this is a complicated program. I think the devil's in the details. A 421A that is clearly needed some modification, and the governor has been extraordinarily clear about that. It was a program that probably, in the form that it existed, had run its course and needed to be fixed, and there were proposals on the table last legislative session, as you well know, to make some important changes. Had the two sides managed to reach an agreement, we'd see those changes in place now. I think we have to wait to see if something else comes up that has a similar set of changes that make 421A, keep 421A, stick to the mission of 421A to incent the development of affordable housing, while making sure that what is really a very generous tax abatement program for private developers is fair to the public as well.
So do you think that the market, the private sector market, should scale down its expectations going forward?
Sorry,
do you believe the private sector market should scale down its expectation in terms of profit margins going forward?
I don't think necessarily, no. I really don't. I think it's possible to operate profitably with or without a 421A.
Okay. The two questions I had relates to the 2 of the 3 programs under the House New York 2020. The Welcome Home New York, which to combat neglect in the distressed communities and increase access to housing, and the Opportunity New York, which ensures state investment benefits all New Yorkers through the launch of this program. Can you walk us through those programs and tell us where they collaborate at the city and or federal level in an effort to make them come to pass?
And I'm sorry, you were asking about
the Welcome Home New York program and then the Opportunity New York program.
Okay. So those are the names that we've given we've put over broad umbrellas, families of programs for the capital, the new capital that the governor has rolled out. I think all of the work that we do. You asked about cooperation with federal and local officials. Everything that we do is in close cooperation with our partners, both at the federal and the local level. So the same is true of those programs. I think as we complete this budget and then move into the phase where we're going to actually allocate capital, we'll continue to work closely with all of our local partners.
I guess what I'm asking, can you give me a little more further details based, I have like 2 paragraphs related to these programs, and I still don't understand, what they're going to do and how they're going to be executed.
Sure. I think probably the best thing to do, Assemblyman, is to come back to you and your staff as we flesh those out further. Once this budget is developed and once we've put capital out through our RFP process, so that we understand. We respond to the market coming into us to propose projects. All of our programs are developed in the interest of obviously developing affordable housing and protecting the affordable housing that exists.
So these 2 programs are still being created as we speak?
Well, our budget was just proposed, as you know. We're just a very short period of time into the proposal of the budget. As the budget moves forward through the rest of the process and then it's adopted, hopefully in the beginning of April, we'll have a greater understanding at that time of how specifically we plan to allocate that money through those specific umbrella programs.